Good evening, everyone. It's great to have you here. My name is Jonathan Eilert. I'm lead pastor here at Prince of Peace, and we're thrilled to have you all here tonight for an evening of discussion, dialogue, and a time where we can come together as Christians from a number of different denominations and backgrounds and think about how we are all called to love boldly. And we here as a congregation have been in a long time discussion about our ways in which we express our human sexuality and how we live together in community, knowing that there is a wide gamut of expressions of human sexuality, and what does that mean for us together as a gathered community. So you go all the way back to Pastor Tom's time here, my predecessor, and conversations that began back in the 80s and 90s. On through the decades, and we have continued to come together as a community here at Prince of Peace. And I've always been impressed at times when we have discussed, when we were discussing whether or not we as pastors would marry gay and lesbian people that came to us and desired to be married. We had that dialogue together as a congregation. There were folks that felt very strongly about that from various perspectives. We would begin the evening and there would be a lot of emotion and a lot of tension as we began that discussion, but by the end we saw folks that felt differently about this issue, hugging each other, grateful to be together in Christian community where we could love and respect each other. And that's always been our goal. And so when we were introduced to Love Boldly through one of our members here at Prince of Peace, Holly Whitaker, had been to an event like this up in Columbus. We began to hear about the kind of dialogue that we had. We thought that really sounds like it fits for us here at Prince of Peace. And it's a fitting way for us to continue that dialogue because it's something that continues to evolve and change over time as we meet new people, as our families change and grow. We come to understand the way that we relate to folks that might be different from us in different ways. And so it's really important for us to continue the dialogue and continue to be in relationship and seeking to learn and to grow as we talk with folks. So we're grateful. Heidi Weaver is here. Heidi is the founder and executive director for Love Boldly, and we're grateful for her presence and this wonderful group of panelists up here. One of those Holy Spirit things, as we began to talk about this event independently from our congregation, one of our own members ended up being on the panel. So she'll tell her story in a bit here, but that was one of those ways that we said, all right, the Holy Spirit's blessing this whole process and that the way that this is coming together. So let's have a word of prayer now. Ask for the Spirit's presence with us tonight as we begin a time of dialogue. Let us pray. God, we invoke the Spirit to come among us now. We pray that your Spirit would guide our conversation, that we would be open and respectful of each other, that we would be loving and grace-filled in the ways that we respond to thoughts and ideas that might challenge us. We pray that we would come into this night open to see what you would have us hear, open to hear important words for us that would broaden our perspective, deepen our love and commitment to your way in this world. So God, we ask your blessing upon our dialogue this night. May it be fruitful and may it give you honor. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Good evening. It's good to be with y'all tonight. My name is Heidi Weaver-Smith. It's great to see you all here out tonight. I just want to share a little bit about Love Boldly, why we're doing this event, just to help frame our conversation for this evening. So I think you probably received one of these little programs when you came in tonight. I want to just turn your attention just to that opening paragraph on the front. And I'm just going to read through it and just share a little bit about our work. So our prayer tonight is that we might invite the fruit of the Spirit to infuse our conversations on faith, sexuality, and gender identity. We want to learn to befriend folks we typically fear in conversations, and to grow in empathy and understanding of viewpoints with which we don't typically interact, and to help you articulate what you believe and why. In compassionate and productive ways in your own communities, and most of all, We want to invite you to join our mission to reconcile with self, others, and God at the intersection of faith, sexuality, and gender identity. As Jonathan mentioned, we've done this event a few times in the past, and what always stands out to me is how much more we have in common than what we have hold differences. And my experience over the years of working at LOVEboldly has been that many people within the LGBTQ community have a faith background or are currently part of a faith community, but oftentimes feel unsafe or unsure about whether they are somebody who belongs in our communities. And so, as I've observed these divisions over the years, we thought, if we want all people to know Christ, we should probably create communities where people can feel safe coming, right? And so, there's an old saying, if you know one LGBTQ person, you know one LGBTQ person. And our stories, the stories you'll hear tonight are diverse. The stories that you will hear will mention different needs, hopes, dreams, and fears in these conversations. And our hope is tonight that we can expose you to some things maybe you've never heard. I expect you'll hear some things that will maybe rub you the wrong way, and I expect you'll hear other things that will make you want to stand up and clap. And we just want to invite you into that tension with us tonight and give you ways of interacting, because if you're like me, probably not all of your conversations around this topic have gone so well, or maybe you've just avoided the conversations. And so our hope is just that tonight you can have a space where you can engage those conversations authentically with one another, and that you can hear and learn from these wonderful panelists doing that in our midst tonight as well. I want to introduce you to Heather Schmidicki, who is going to lead our conversation tonight and explain to us how this evening will go.
Yes.
Wonderful. Hi, I'm Heather Schmidicki. I'm the program coordinator here for LOVEboldly, and I'm just thrilled to see you all here tonight. I've been involved in this conversation for about 7 years, when a dear gay friend of mine came and asked me if my church was LGBT friendly. And my response to him was something that makes me cringe today. It made me cringe at that moment, made him cringe, and then it made me feel sick. And I realized it's that one of those turning point moments in your life where you realize something needs to be done. And I'm thinking, God, something needs to be done about the fact that my traditional church is not a safe place for my LGBTQ plus friends. And he was like, yes, someone does need to do something about that, and that is you. And so throughout the course of entering into these conversations, I stumbled upon LOVEboldly about 4 years ago, and it was like finding an old friend. And so I worked from volunteer up into being hired this year. I'm just thrilled to be here. So yeah, let's get started, shall we? I'm going to give you a little overview of the night, what we're going to do. We've got this broken up into 3 different kind of sessions. First, we're going to spend about 50 minutes doing an official conversation dialogue with these beautiful people up here. And then we're going to invite you to become a part of what we're doing here. And we're going to break up into some groups and do some discussion questions together to kind of process what we hear up here tonight. And hopefully we want to model ways to have healthy, graceful dialogue in these tense moments. And then we will invite you throughout the evening. If you have a question that comes up, we're going to invite you to submit questions for the panelists, and we'll take 30 minutes towards the end of our time tonight together, where you get to ask them the burning questions that did not get answered up here on stage. And so I'm going to tell you real quick how to do that, and I will remind you of this again. If you have a smartphone, go to slido.com. That's SLIDO.com. And we have a slide, we'll throw that up here in a minute. And once you get there, you're going to enter an event code. And it should come up on the screen here in a minute. These are anonymous, unless you sign your name. And the cool thing is, if you see someone else has submitted a question that you want answered, you can upvote it or check it or like it, and the ones with the most votes will kind of float to the top, and we'll say, oh, here's something that a lot of people want to talk about. So throughout the evening, you can submit those. You'll be able to, on your phone, you'll be able to see what questions have been submitted, and then when we go through the Q&A, we'll post them up there. So if you don't catch this right now, we will be reminding you throughout the night. Hashtag G783 is the event code. All right, so just explain a little bit about our fishbowl dialogue that we're doing here. I'm going to take time to ask each panelist a question, and there's going to be a limited amount of time in which they're able to answer. And so these are tough questions that we often would spend maybe an hour in someone's living room talking about, and so we understand that not all things can be said. And so then they'll have 3 minutes. We have a lovely timekeeper up here, and she's going to cut us off when we get to 3 minutes. And then each of the other panelists will have an opportunity to respond to what was said, to ask some questions, clarifications, or to share their experience that goes along with what the question was. So this, we talk a lot about safe spaces. This tonight is going to be more of a brave space. And we just really want everybody to feel empowered to be vulnerable and really open about your stories. And we realize that sometimes there are going to be things that are said and some things that are shared that are not, they don't line up with maybe your ideology or your theology, and that's okay. We just want people to feel, that we affirm belonging in these spaces, and that people will acknowledge hurt too. Something that we do within LOVEboldly conversations. A lot of times we have what's called an oops, ouch rule. And I would encourage you guys to use that if you feel like someone has said something that hurts you. You can say, oh, ouch, that kind of hurt. And then the oops part, the person who said it has an opportunity to maybe say, oh, hey, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, but here's kind of where I was coming from. And you kind of process through that rather than, oh, I was hurt, and I'm going to just shove that down and then be resentful through the rest of the conversation. And so that is something that you all can utilize too in conversations that are tense and stressful. It's good to just have some ground rules going in that, okay, we can stop each other if we need to. And before we get started, I would just kind of like to, in making a brave space, I would like for each of you to share one word or a statement that you guys need to enter into these kinds of conversations with authenticity and with open hearts towards one another. So if you guys want to share what that might look like.
The word for me, when I thought about that, would be grace. Just to have grace up here with each other, to be able to give each other time. A lot of the conversations can be difficult, so just to give each other time to share, and then being open and not afraid to ask follow-up questions. I think that's going to be important, and then throughout the night.
Yep.
I think my word would be flexibility in thinking. So I know for myself, sometimes it's difficult to stretch what we've been taught and what we know, and just being able to flex that. Doesn't mean you have to agree or move with it, but just being open to flex with that, because that's hard for me to do, and it takes some intentionality to be able to do that.
I would say respect. So just knowing that everyone's coming from a certain place because they've lived their life, had a certain amount of experiences, and so just recognizing that that's valid and that we have to work hard to understand it fully. We can't just look at our own experiences and go, oh, that doesn't apply for me.
I would say to be grateful, because these conversations don't get to happen a lot. So the fact that we can often be here to experience that is definitely something to be grateful about. So yeah.
I feel so official now. All right, so let's just dive in, shall we? Melinda, my first question is for you. As a Christian mother who changed her viewpoint on sexuality from traditional or conservative, which means God doesn't bless same-sex relationships, to affirming, which means God does bless same-sex relationship, after your son Elias came out, what has your experience been with Christians in the conservative church, and did you feel loved and supported by the traditional church that you were a part of at the time?
It's been a hard journey so far. We were really involved in our former church, so we were members there for 20 years, and so that was our family outside of our biological family. So during the process of just getting educated and changing my theological view on things, you know, there was a lot of loss that happened from people that were more traditionally minded thinking and people that we had relationships with. In the beginning it was harder. I can say now, really when I have conversations with folks like that, it's really a blessing because I'm at a different point now in my life and I've done a lot of volunteer work that I'm able to try to share resources. There are definitely still some folks that they have a mindset and it's hard to kind of break through that, but it's helped me to see just how far along God's brought me and how it wasn't too far long ago that I had similar thinking. So it's brought a lot of revelation to me.
So in that moment of processing Elias coming out, was there support or were you?
So I would love to say that I became a PFLAG member when he came out, but then I would be lying in church. He came out twice. Initially at the age of 13, was kind of outed in a sense and shared with me that he thought he was bisexual. His stepmother found an amazing Mark Wahlberg picture. Good taste. So, and then when we had the conversation, he tried to tell me bisexual, and I totally shot it down. So it was really not a good experience, and something that we would share with parents now. I made it about me.
Right.
It became all about me. But I was blessed that a few years later, when he was 18, that he came again, and by that point, I had started my journey, and so it was a very different experience. And since that point, I think our relationship has grown stronger than it probably was even before.
Anybody wanna add on to that, or Elias, wanna speak into that
I'm
at all?
glad that my 18-year-old heartbreak could be easier coming out pain. So, thanks for that.
Either of you, how do you feel that the church could be better prepared to come around families in these moments, even coming from a conservative viewpoint?
I would say, I think the church just needs to get back to its roots and remembering who they are at the core, and that's to be a community and to be a safe space for all their members. You know, not just where you stand on your sexual orientation or anything. You know, that's where you should be able to go and, you know, ask for help, ask for counseling. And I think sometimes when the LGBT or whatever it is that differs from that viewpoint is brought to the forefront, they forget almost, okay, well, that may go against what I feel is right, but you're still a member of my church. So I think that there's no transitioning back to where they were 5 minutes ago, which is fine. Everyone needs their moment to grow, right? So
Yes, we all do. Melinda, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would definitely say, just being brave as we are right now today to host an event like this in a church. A lot of times, folks want to pretend like things aren't happening,
Right.
it's not in their church, it's not going on. And that's not true because we're people. So we have our lives, we're experiencing many different things. And as much as we, study and learn and grow in the Word, we're still going to deal with different things because we are humans. And so I think it's important to be vulnerable, and I think it's especially important for leadership of the church to be willing to take, to be open for that, definitely.
Just creating safe spaces for people to share these things and to talk about them rather than sweep them under the rug. Yeah. All right, Carson, I'm moving on to you. Carson is an LGBTQ Christian who maintains a more traditional or conservative view on human sexuality. What have your experiences with the progressive, affirming Christians been like in your life?
Yeah, so my name's Carson. Like she just said, I uphold what you would call a traditional Christian belief. So I ultimately believe that marriage and sex is designed for a man and a woman. And so with that, in terms of interacting with kind of the affirming side there, I kind of had the reverse coming out experience. So I came out to my parents, and my parents are actually affirming. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like the reverse narrative that we kind of typically expect. Yet at the same time, it also was a very typical coming out story because it was still a very hard conversation. I shared that I was gay, and they reacted totally well. But then I shared my beliefs on that, and what I believe the Bible says, and that was where a lot of hard feelings came in. So for them, the concern came from one, kind of fearing that I hated myself. There was a fear that I was signing on for a life of loneliness and misery, and kind of turning off my life for opportunities for joy. And I think there was also kind of some fear that the conservative church was convincing me that I was worth less in God's eyes, and that I was a second-class citizen in His kingdom. So as you can imagine, especially for anyone here who's a parent, you can imagine that if you think your child's going through that, that's a huge reaction. So that's why it was so heavy. From my perspective, I was taking the right stance on a really hard, controversial issue, but from their perspective, I was ultimately kind of signing on for something really painful, and I was incorrect about what I was doing. It was really hard, and at one point later on in my relationship with my parents, I was told, you really shouldn't ever share what you believe with a gay person. If you do, you could really mess them up. And so that also kind of further told me, okay, so what I'm hearing is that my beliefs are incorrect and they are detrimental to other gay people. It sounds like I really need to just put that in a box, because that's just going to do a lot of harm and damage. Which then, of course, if my beliefs are that, then what am I? Am I a damaging person? Do I just go around hurting people? So that was hard to kind of navigate that. And I also kind of challenged their faith too. And they definitely felt frustration with the church for preaching that belief to me. And so, so it's created, plenty of conflicts there. And so for a while, I definitely think I didn't know how to fully embrace my own belief, and it definitely made me feel more nervous to be around people having a firm belief, because from my perspective, if I were to share that belief, they would kind of be like, you're a bigot and you're the problem.
All right.
So stop. Don't say again what you believe.
Thanks. Guys have any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Have you had experience with any traditionally minded people that question the fact that you still are gay, even though you have traditional views? Has that been
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like in a way I do kind of differ from a lot of people's experiences, just because I've been blessed with people in my life, fellow Christians in high school and college, post-college, that have ultimately heard my story and showed me respect and love. Really, the only time I ever, and even this wasn't really, I didn't consider it to be that bad at all, but at one point, a Christian leader, this wasn't in a church, it was in a parachurch ministry, asked me, "Are you gay?" And so that was, obviously, and I was in high school, so it's kind of like, I definitely feel a little singled out that I'm like different right now. But at the same time, it's kind of one of those things where it did open the doors, and we ended up having a really good conversation. And at one point, he did ask me, do you believe in the concept of praying away the gay? Like, do you believe in that? And I said, I really don't. I don't think that. Well, I think I said like God can do anything, but I don't really think that that's something that I need to be doing or that I should be expecting to happen. And he just went like, yeah, okay, I totally get that, respect that. So, yeah. And in terms of my church right now, I'm out to a good amount of people, but it's not like everyone in the church knows. I have confidence that I don't think anyone would like treat me antagonistically, but yeah. So far, honestly, no one's treated me badly. No.
Carson, do you get any grief from people who maybe don't understand why you would use the word gay to describe yourself, even though you do not, adhere to a life that traditionally someone who calls himself gay would?
Yeah, there was a survey done with a lot of people during like my camp of having like a traditional viewpoint, but still identifying as like LGBT Christian. Because there's another term of like same-sex attracted that can also be used, and I feel fine with both of those terms, because in my mind they're literally synonyms. I think the big difference is that using the word gay, well, one, it has a lot of like baggage. I think a lot of people kind of immediately are assuming a lot of things based on what they've been told or whatever. But in my mind, they're the same thing, and especially talking to non-Christians, the word gay makes a lot more sense. Same-sex attracted sounds like a bit more like, oh, is that like a disease or something? And it's like, no, I'm not saying that. I don't believe that. So like that's just how it could be there. But anyway, the survey that I was referencing like a minute ago it pointed to the fact that the most common identifying language for people in my camp is whatever they think is going to work best in that specific scenario.
Yeah.
So if you're around a lot of conservative people, go ahead and just use same-sex attracted. If you're around more liberal people, use gay. If you're around secular people, use gay. So I feel like I can kind of adhere to that some. So like when I came out to my small group at my church, I kind of just phrased it as more like, I've only ever been attracted to men, and I was in a relationship with a man at one point, and blah, blah, blah. And so because I think in my mind like that gets to the point,
Exactly.
And that conveys what I'm getting without being like, here's the gay word, now you're not going to listen to anything I'm saying for the next 10 minutes.
What exactly does that mean?
Right, exactly. And it was in a conversation once where I hadn't come out to, the pastor knew, but I hadn't come out to anyone else in the group. And so we were discussing something by Sam Alberry, who's a gay Christian, and he, so I think he was using the term same-sex attracted. Anyway, so we started talking about like terminology, and at that point everyone's going around the room telling what they think, and there was definitely like one person who said like, yeah, I think we can, or I think he just said like, yeah, definitely same-sex attracted is a better word there. Gay seems like a really tricky word. And then like 5 minutes later, I was like, so I'm going to talk now, and I'm going to share, like the fact that I'm gay, and whatever. That was kind of the moment where I'm like, oh yeah, I guess someone really could question me using that word, but I kind of view it as like when I'm already in a relationship with someone and they know me, I would hope that they would understand that like that word is not me putting on a lot of like sinful connotations or anything like that. It's me saying like, hey, this is my experience. I experience attraction to people of the same sex. That's it. Period. So so far I haven't had like too much of a conflict about that, but I do think my brain automatically filters through like what is the right word to say in this situation and then chooses it. Yeah.
Context dependent.
Yeah, and I do think it is context dependent,
All right.
especially generationally too.
David, you get the mic. What has your experience been like as a transgender person of faith, transgender person in faith environments?
Just the church. I've been pretty privileged. I haven't been transgender in the church for very long because I left the church during my transition. So my experience has been trying to go back into the church, and that's been very difficult because you have to filter through websites and beliefs and systems and figure out who believes what and where. And so for me, I think for me as a person trying just to get my way back in is challenging because my theology didn't change with my transition. And so because my theology has stayed where it has, then if I can't go back to my own, then trying to find a church or a faith community that doesn't compromise what my faith believes or what I'm believing or my experience with Christ, then I'm placed in a no-win situation.
So what can our churches do to make sure transgender individuals feel safe and a sense of belonging within the walls of our churches?
I even had the question ahead of time and having a really good. I think that and if you ask, so I think the biggest thing is just don't doubt the person. I think that for me, every time, and I have to fight my own doubt, and so then if I go into a faith community, the first thing I need them not to do is doubt my relationship with Jesus. That kind of goes against what Christ followers believe anyway. I mean, we would preach against that from the pulpit. Don't judge your fellow brothers. We differ on all kinds of things with each other in the church, and so we don't often go around and question that. We might pray for them, but we don't question their faith, their belief in Christ. And so I think the biggest thing that I can think of that's the most challenging is just don't doubt my profession of faith. And so once we get to that, then we can get to like the more practical things for safety. Everybody needs a safe place to worship, and so again, this goes back to don't make assumptions or make exceptions for the person that's sitting in the pew.
That's a question. What do you think is like the biggest misconception, like as soon as the word transgender or anything like that comes into the conversation? What do you feel like you have to like clarify the most?
Speaking personally, because as Heidi mentioned, every individual story is really different. I think the biggest misconception is just the transgender is an umbrella, has become an umbrella term. There's a lot of variances and a lot of spectrum on sexuality and gender identity. And I think the misconception is a lot of people will put us in a box. I mean, my story contains a medical component that other transgender individuals may not have. It's a blessing and a curse for me because I'm it's all considered, mental or emotional, or those misconceptions about, psychology or mental health. But then there's also a lack of education and a lack of knowledge even that intersex conditions or medical components to someone's story can be present. And that's not talked about a whole lot. So there's just a lot. I think the greatest misconception is just a lack of education, and everyone's put in the same box and dealt with in the same way. And so it really is individualistic. It has to be each story. There will always be commonalities. Even all of us share some commonalities. The spectrum will share that, but each person is going to be individual. And so lumping everybody into one spot is not going to be effective for evangelism and for fair treatment.
I keep thinking, David, about a conversation that we had when we all met beforehand, and this just sticks in my mind that we were talking about questions, and maybe being nervous about what questions are people going to ask, and you just said a really wonderful thing that sticks in my mind, that you just wish that people would get all these questions out up front. Do you want to speak to that? You know what I'm talking about, what you said about that?
I don't invite inappropriate or boundary-breaking questions,
Right.
But I think for me, and this again is very individualistic, I do think, especially with transgender individuals, there's a lot of questions regarding gender and sex. Mm-hmm. And so we just have to call that for what it is. I'm not uncomfortable with those things. And I think what happens is those are the misconceptions. And I think if people would ask questions that are really there, the ones that are uncomfortable or may seem intrusive, at least for me, I invite those, because then we get an understanding, or it really gets to what a person really wants to know, and may, one, help them continue in what they're believing, or it could help them understand a different way of looking at it. So it is intrusive, and not everyone would welcome that. And I also understand that some people find certain questions, direct questions about sexuality or gender differences in body and anatomy, those things can be offensive in certain contexts. Where, at least with me, I don't mind it because I think it breaks the barriers. I mean, it's what you're thinking anyway, so we might as well talk about it to get you to where you need to be, and it gives us opportunity to find something probably more common than one would think.
Thanks for sharing that. So keep that in mind with the questions here. I'm going to move to Elias. Elias is someone who has stepped away from the Christian faith after experiencing hurt from the church and your family when you came out as gay. Might you still be practicing Christianity today had you felt better loved and accepted? And you might give a little background.
Yeah. So my coming out story was a little bit different than most, kind of like Carson's, except that it's accepting. I came out, like my mom said, at 13, and I was just in that prime of kind of discovering out who I was. I was, like 13, just being 13.
You like Mark
Yeah,
Wahlberg?
yeah, loved Mark Wahlberg, loved Calvin Klein. And so when I came out to her, she took it not so well. She said she made it about herself. She had a moment, is what I called it, but she grew from it, she learned, and then when I came out at 18, I went through a really bad heartbreak, and I called her on the phone, and I'm like, okay, so listen, I'm gonna need you to just, like, listen, and what I'm saying, and I told her what happened, and she came home and we were good. But I thought about something, actually, when I didn't say, when we were on the little pre-meet. Yeah, so I recently, actually this year, had to come out again to my grandparents who are very Jehovah's Witness, and at this point I was just kind of like, okay, I don't have time for this, because I always say that gay men age like cats, so even though I'm like only 28, I'm much older than that, so I don't have time to deal with, no. So, I came out, well, I told my mom, like, you can tell grandma that's fine, because I wasn't, no. So, she told her, and my grandparents took it as I would, they were like, we love him, but we can't have me or my partner in the house. And I'm like, but wait a minute, you have other people who have kids out of wedlock. Okay, that's fine.
Right.
We all make choices. So, I had to come up to them, and I unfortunately lost a good part of that family, but, I more or less came up to them because I wanted to say, hey, you're getting older, I think I deserve to be honest with you.
Right.
So yeah, but get back to your question. With that background, when I came out, I lost a lot of my Christian friends. And then when gay marriage got passed, that really hit the nail on the head, because I saw a bunch of stuff on social media, and I'm like, oh no, I didn't know you were like that. And it's, I guess, we're all sinners at the end of the day, so we really shouldn't pick and choose of which one we're going to focus on. But I kind of got thrown away from Christianity because I just like, well, if this was my support and my home, then I shouldn't really be here anymore. But that's fine. So I went out and discovered other religions and really kind of explored, and that was awesome. I would always talk about with my mom about the different religious things. I am a practicing pagan, and so I don't know if I would honestly go back, just because I think if I did, I would definitely stick to something more of a spiritual aspect of Christianity, just because I am interested in that. But I don't know if I could go back to like rules and boundaries and yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Oh, of course.
So you mentioned a little bit about this, what changed when you came out. So loss of friends and
lots of friends, lots of family. I think it's just people, they don't understand, and that's fine. And like, I don't get mad at people when they say, oh, I can't be around you because of who you are, because I'm like, okay, well, you haven't reached the point of understanding that I've already reached within myself. And being someone who is very, very involved in the church, I always say that I was a pastor's kid without the title. I couldn't, it was very that everything just like snapped and like, what? You know, and something that I feel like a lot of gay or LGBTQ Christians go through, it's almost like, I guess I can kind of describe it as burning off your old flesh, because something that we've been taught growing up is constantly, you're gonna go to hell, like you're gonna be dragged to hell, you're gonna burn in hell for being gay. You know, and having that mindset and then accepting yourself as, okay, like, I can't really control this, so I don't know if, no, I'm not, that's something very hard to get over, because, you're taught from a young age that these sins are gonna send you to hell. So the fact that you kind of have to reteach yourself that, it's very difficult. So, yeah, I don't get mad at people, they just need time to grow.
And they need to have more conversations.
Yeah.
So based off of all those coming out stories, all that type of stuff, what's like the things that you wish that people would do more, between the two coming out stories with your mom, like what are the things that your mom started to do that you're like, thank you, that's what I was looking for, or that type of stuff?
So definitely ask questions, because if someone in your family or your friend is coming out, at that point they've already accepted who they are and they're ready to then let you into their life. So definitely ask questions, because we're ready to answer any question. And listen, definitely listen. And our coming out is our moment, and that should remain our moment. And we're selfish sometimes, so that should remain our moment. I mean, I would say listen and just ask questions, because we've already accepted that, so now we're here to help you get to that point. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, sorry.
Sure. I'll always take mine. No, I appreciate you saying the fact that it's our moment, because I think that is what's hard, is often coming out stories become like whoever you just came out to, it's like, well, now you tell me what you think, and I'm gonna cringe up and stuff. But ultimately, I definitely believe that the number one goal should be showing love and care to the person who just shared that with you. It doesn't mean you need to lie about what you believe at all, but just the fact that I feel like thank you is usually the best reaction. It's just like, thank you, thanks for sharing that. Thank you that you trust me so much. Rather than turning into okay, so right off the bat, let's break out our Bible. Right off the bat, let's create a systematic theology that we can talk about together. But really being I love you, I care about you. Let's just focus on that. Because I know for me, my brother and sister are both not Christian and are affirming. So naturally, when you take out that belief, then from their perspective, it really was kind of really off the tracks of what's right and accurate, my beliefs. But at the time, I told my brother, he just responded basically okay, thanks. And then it was only a year later that we finally had a conversation where we kind of hashed out our theological differences, and that was a hard conversation. But I did appreciate that initial conversation didn't immediately become we need to figure out our differences right away. We need to debate it and discuss it, because after you share that type of thing, you're not in good shape to debate. You're really not.
You need to go take a nap or something.
Yeah, you're cool. I'm gonna go to the bathroom for a while and come back. So I think that's huge. It's listening and caring for the person who's sharing it with you.
Cool. All right, Melinda. Oh, how are we doing time-wise? What time is it?
It is 7:45.
Okay, so we have 15 more minutes.
We
Okay.
started at 7:15. So, yeah.
Melinda, what was the turning point for you theologically? Was it a gradual shift in belief system, or was there a moment?
I think it was, I don't think there was really a moment. Being Elias's mom, it wasn't really a surprise. I mean, I'm his mom, so I really knew a long time ago. And, but because of my belief system, that's where I had the struggle. So there was some of the, go in his room and pray over him and think that, all these different things could happen. And which is why I had such a poor reaction initially. But really what happened is our relationship was so strained from the time he did the initial coming out to the next time he did. And had always been very close. My daughter and him and I, always. And so to have those years during his high school where he wouldn't talk to me because he couldn't, because really I didn't want to listen. When I would hear about him being bullied or something, I would make it more about, well, what are you wearing? How are you dressing? How are you acting? Versus they shouldn't bully you versus, being on his side. And so really it was the strain of that. And then just seeing too, having my eyes more open to just kind of notice my surroundings and really pay attention and have my ears open to hear what are the conversations that are happening around people that I was fellowshipping with, who we shared similar beliefs. What are they really saying? Because I guess I didn't pay that close of attention before. Because my world was on this little kind of thing, and it wasn't something that mattered at the moment.
Right.
So I think all of those things happening at one time. And then I took a really great college class that was strictly about the Bible, all historical. First time I heard of Martin Luther. And it really gave me a different perspective because I wasn't being taught a certain denomination, a certain theology from a denomination. I was learning more about history and facts and who they wrote, who were the writers writing to, what was the time of the period that they wrote in, what are all the translations. And so this whole world of education, and that's why I believe education is so important, to just, learn about why do you believe what you believe? Was it just because that's where you grew up and that's what you've always been told? What does it really mean? I always taught my kids about religion is different than having a relationship with Christ. And when it came down to things got hard, they remembered that and they reminded me. So it was, definitely a process.
So were there costs involved in this change in theology to you?
Definitely. When I decided to leave the denomination we were part of, as I said, 20 years, very involved. He jokes about, being the pastor's kid without the title. And I told him when we met last week, well, I'm going into seminary, so now you get to really say that one day. But definitely, breaking off from the church was very, very difficult because that's a huge piece of your life. We weren't just Sunday people, we were every day. And so that was so that was,
Love it so much.
so that was a huge piece. So experiencing those losses and things like that,
Can I ask a question? So during the first coming out experience, you guys can look back at it now and be like, okay, that was not ideal, that wasn't the best way we could have handled that. Just to kind of give insight, what do you think was going through your head in that moment? What was your priority? What was how do you do this to help Elias that ultimately later on you're like, okay, I think that was helpful.
First of all, I can say that it was a really bad year. Family, just for our family. My mom died suddenly that year, and I donated my liver to my dad, and he rejected. We had a lot of emotional things happen. So when I say I made it about me, 100%, I made it about me. It was how can you do this? I'm here hanging on, really. And I kind of forgot I am a mom, and I really lost that. I patted myself on the back a little bit because I was better than his dad. I responded better than his dad, so I thought I was the better person. But when I look back now, definitely what you do not do. We could have a pamphlet, what you do not do when you respond. But after that, what really set in was fear. And so when we talk to parents now with some volunteer work, we talk about there's so much fear that as a parent now this new door is opened, and you think about all the ways your kid is going to be discriminated against, all the ways they could be hurt, especially if they're a good-hearted, kind person. And so there's a whole new set of things that you didn't think about before that is now your reality, and things that you can't always shield them from. So I had some time to process that, and then when it came back around the second time, we were able to, just build our relationship from there.
we're still discerning, or even doubts that we're having. Do you ever experience doubt or uncertainty that you've understood God's voice correctly on this topic? And what's the most respectful way someone could respond to and journey with you in these doubtful moments?
So I transitioned in 2014. I was a full-time pastor for about 10 years. And prior to that, and as a result of something totally unrelated to my transition, I ended up resigning in my denomination, resigning my credential, and returning to lay ministry. That afforded me the opportunity to really process is transitioning something that I can reconcile with my faith. It happened, I will admit, it happened fast because I had spent probably 20 years trying to figure out. I've been every acronym I've been all of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not fun though. So anyway, I've been all of them, and so I spent 20 years doing that. So when I finally settled on the T, apparently, and so that's where I ended up. I had to figure out what I wanted, how I was going to reconcile with my faith. My faith lens, so when I talk about my faith, I was raised in a Wesleyan holiness denomination, and that's the lens that I read scripture through. Doesn't mean I sit with everything, but I was a pastor in this denomination, and the longer I pastored, the more I believed it, and it was really good. And so, but I then had to filter, can I transition in good faith and in good conscience? And I doubted every step of the way. I really did. I questioned everything, and I kind of fleeced with the Lord and said, okay, God, at any point you can stop this. That's a horrifying prayer. And I'll share a small story because Carson still has some beat. So I went to get my name changed, and my journey for transition was remarkably smooth and was unprecedentedly privileged. And I went to get my name changed, and the typical process at this point would have been for me to show up and the judge say yes and we'd be done. They told me to sit down when I walked in, and I thought that's not good. And then I read the dress code sign, and I was out of dress code, and that wasn't good, and so I wasn't really sure what to do. And it was the first time I prayed to God and said, okay, I really did mean that you can stop the process, but I don't know that I'm ready for you to do that. By now, for me, surgeries had already, it was all done. So I'm like, this is not a prime time for you to say no. So I doubted though the whole way, and even in that moment, that was probably the first time I might have, I didn't take it back. I'm like, are you sure, God? And so I got afraid, and so I still, my name was changed, and that's a whole different story, and I can tell you personally if you want to hear the rest of it. But so I went through that, but all through the process, there were times where I'd wake up in the middle of the night and be like, what am I doing? Is this okay? For me, I was able to say, okay, this is okay. And the road that was paved for me, I was raised that, the road to hell was smooth and paved as well. But, it really was, God worked in a lot of different ways. And so for me, it was affirming. If he didn't mean to do that, then there are days I still wonder if this is okay. I don't do it as often now as I did in the early days, but I still wonder. And so, I just doubt. And how do I deal with it? What was the last part? You're going to tell me.
Oh yeah,
It's
that's
a
a
long
loaded
question.
question. I'm sorry. How can someone come alongside you in these doubtful moments?
Don't doubt me. A doubter doesn't need another doubter. And so I understand where the doubt comes from, but if I'm already doubting, then I don't need you to say, well, that's Satan helping you, or that's the Lord telling you you shouldn't be doing it. No, I could just be doubting. Everyone doubts a relationship at times. There are moments when am I hearing God? Am I hearing me? Because our voices are real loud sometimes.
Yeah.
So just don't doubt for me or use my doubt against me. Just sit with me. One of the story about Thomas. The Lord didn't really condemn him necessarily for doubting. He helped him out, but he didn't condemn him. He didn't I know the story. He kind of condemned him, but he didn't. He was gracious, and even if he rebuked him to a certain point, he still showed him. He still extended grace and education and love. And so, yeah, just don't. I'm already doubting enough on some days. I don't. Sit with me. Let us doubt together, because the same questions I'm using are the ones you have too. So, can God still love you, or are you going to go to heaven? I don't know. And it's a great question. Let's answer that together.
That's good. Any other thoughts on doubt from any of y'all?
Are you sure you think that?
Absolutely not.
Okay, what time are we at now here? Good breaking point. All right, so now we're going to move into just a little time of processing together. I'm going to invite Heidi to come up and walk us through that. We're going to make a little physical transition, and we're going to be able to stretch our legs a little bit and talk with each other. Like you.
Great. So I know you guys are seeing all of the questions up there
I know,
and like
blowing up.
burning questions, and you're probably like, oh, I just want to get to that. We're going to just take a little break, and I'm going to ask you all to file out into the lobby and sit around the tables out there. We're going to practice talking with one another now, in the same way that these guys have been talking with each other. And so I'm going to guide you through some activities out there. I challenge you to sit with somebody you don't know or don't know well, so that you can get a real experience about how to talk about this with people that you don't already know everything about what they think. So we'll take a few minutes, go ahead and head on out and find a place around one of the tables out in the lobby.
So we're going to dive into the Q&A. We've got a few that have kind of bubbled to the top here, so there's a lot of questions. We will likely not get through all of them, and that's okay. Karen, keep us in check with it's 8:29. We are moving just like right along on schedule. It's beautiful. All right, so first question. Ooh, it's got 5 votes. We just must answer this one. How important is it to you that churches publish a formal statement regarding their theological position? So like maybe on their website or within their bylaws. Anybody want?
Yeah, is this working? I'm loud, so I can just do this. Like, people tell me to be quiet all the time.
Oh, we might
Talk.
turn it off. We might turn it off.
That's this. Yeah, that is how microphones work. Okay, cool. Stepping up well. Okay. Yeah, so this is kind of like a timely question for me. I'm part of the PCA, Presbyterian Church in America. And so right now, like, we had our General Assembly, I want to say a month and a half ago, and that was like the hot button topic. So me and other LGBT Christians like tuned in and watched the live stream of the General Assembly of the Conservative Church. Wow. I was doing for like 10:30 p.m. to like midnight. What? I was like, this is a weird way to spend my night, but I did it. But it came down to, they were kind of trying to parse out like what type of document do we need for our denomination when it comes to the intersection of faith and sexuality. And so I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Nashville Statement, but that's one document that got published that was really well known, but not unanimously embraced for some of the ways that it words stuff. And anyway, they were basically debating like, do we adopt this statement? And there was a lot of concern of like, if we don't have an official statement, then what are our pastors supposed to say? And when we're reaching out to different organizations and they're like, hey, where does your denomination stand on things? What are they supposed to tell them? So that's all type of stuff because I'm not a pastor, I'm not in charge of a church, I have never really thought about it from that perspective. So I know that that's kind of like some of the concerns in play here. I know for me personally, I think I do agree that it is helpful if the denomination is clear about what they believe for the sake of people who are members of that church, and just to know like this is where we stand on things, and in terms of like inviting people into the church, there can be like a really clear voice of that. It's one of those things, I think it's a double-edged sword not being clear, because in one ways it can lead to flexibility, and maybe understanding people of different viewpoints, but at the same time, it can also lead to a lot of pain, because people can enter a church and then only realize far down the road, like, oh, turns out all the pastors actually like think this, and I'm on the total opposite spectrum. I wish that had been clearly presented to me. So in terms of where I stand on it, it's not like I think it's a necessary must, but I do think it does make sense to just go ahead and say, what do you believe about it? What do you believe about this, and to proclaim that so other people can know.
Please make a statement on your website.
Yeah.
For me, the reason why I'm usually not very hard about this, but I have had to search a lot of churches in 5 years, and what is really frustrating is you get into places where you just don't know, and that's uncomfortable because then you get there and you like them and you like the experience and you like the worship, and then you finally find it on their website somewhere deep, hidden somewhere that at the end of the day you'll never become a member, you'll never be welcome to participate any further. That's really frustrating because then you've built relationships with people that you enjoy, you've experienced God and experienced Jesus in this environment, but now you have to leave. You can't stay because you can't go any further. So I've said this on more than one occasion, just in front of the computer. I just wish they would put out on the front, this is where we are, and just own it. Because at the end of the day, you're only going to hurt LGBT people more. We already suffer enough from loss and attachment and struggling through that. Getting to know you and like you and be surrounded by that environment, only to have to pick up and leave, is exhausting.
Yeah. And when you talk about like picking up and leaving, you don't necessarily mean that you've been asked to leave.
No. Yeah, no, you leave quiet. For me, my experience, you leave quietly. I mean, because it's not their fault, and I think it even speaks to what Carson has said. I mean, it's good for the understanding. I mean, the statements serve really good purposes, even if it would be something that is not inclusive. That's very important to have, so that the church knows where they stand and operate. That's important for everyone. So if it's important for your church, it's also important for the LGBTQ person to know where you are on this. So yeah, you leave quietly. You don't want to, you just slip out.
Because you know that you're not going to be able to serve in a way that, would utilize your gifts and.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be preached to serve and to be a part of the church and to be part of the community. You're going to hear that, but you sit in the pew as the exception.
I would agree. I think the statement is important. It's important to be transparent. But even more than the written word, I think it's important than our actions. And so how are we living it out? Because churches are made up of so many different members of different generations and backgrounds, and you can have multiple people that can be at all different levels where they stand on something. Some statements, can come from the denomination itself, and so churches have different ways of how they support that. But I think how we interact and how we live those words out in action, to me, is even more important than what is written down. And also, talk to your pastor, or talk, if you're visiting. That should be something to be able to say, hey, where do you stand, and where does the local church stand in the denomination, especially if it's a new denomination you've never visited before. I think it's important.
That's good advice. Don't be afraid to ask questions of the leadership before diving in and getting involved. Go on to the next question here. Is it important to have the affirmation from your faith community, or does it sit okay with you to know your community does not affirm your sexuality but still loves you?
So, even though I am not in the same faith community, this question makes me think about something that I said to my grandparents in our most recent conversation. And I said, the reason that I'm choosing not to be around is because you don't get to love 75% of me and leave 25% out. I'm all one person. It's all together. It's a total package. There's no return to sender on things you don't like. So, no. I think in order for the individual to feel safe and to feel truly accepted and comfortable, they need to feel loved in all communities that they're a part of. So, yeah.
Thank you, Elias. There's lots of questions here. You guys are good. And this is the tiniest font I've ever seen. can we and how do we love each other and live in community when we have different ideas of what is affirmed by God? A top question.
I definitely think we can. I think that it takes patience and grace. And I also think that sometimes you can establish some healthy boundaries in conversations with people if it becomes detrimental. But if we're truly wanting to be a follower of Christ, then that's exactly what we are, and is to show love to all. There's so many different theologies. We were just talking about that a few minutes ago. I mean, there's so many different Christian sects that people follow, and everyone has the truth, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I think trying to come together with that, I think it's possible if you're genuine.
Yeah, and I think kind of like we were talking about, the idea of this as being a brave space, I think that does come into play here, because when you have that difference of belief, that does cause some tension, and I don't think it's like you should minimize it and pretend it's not there. It is there, and that's okay, and you can still love each other well. But that, I think it's not accurate to minimize the fact that there is going to be some discomfort there because of that difference in belief. And maybe you can think of like a relationship in your life where someone's a Christian, but you disagree on something, and maybe what that tension feels like, it's in that same vein.
Next one. David, can you share more about what you mean when you say your theology hasn't changed even though you've transitioned? How does this play out in your life?
So for me, theology, when I use that term, I was raised to read scripture and interpret scripture through a certain lens. And so it's really hard to undo the lens you're taught. And so for me, that means that lens doesn't change. So I was raised in a Wesleyan holiness denomination. I'm still pretty Wesleyan in theology, or interpreting the scriptures in certain ways and believe in similar ways as far as just theological perspective. At the very base of all of that, though, is just the core of just Christianity, and so I focus a lot on Jesus and less on the theology.
Here.
No, I just have to remind myself what I'm saying. Because transitioning has nothing to do with theology. It doesn't change my heart. I mean, the heart of a transgender person doesn't change just because outside changes, or if they don't have surgeries, or if the name doesn't change. Jesus absolutely made it astoundingly clear in scriptures that God looks on the heart, not on the outside. And so for me, that's where he lives. He doesn't live in my anatomy. He doesn't live in body parts. He lives in my heart. So therefore, my theology isn't going to change just because I change things about me or around me, or change the way I live to the outside world, which is extraordinarily inconvenient, might I add, because Wesleyan holiness doesn't really jive a lot with where I'm at. That's not their fault. It just kind of makes it inconvenient to not break down the lenses. So, and that's my choice. It's kind of where I sit. So.
Thank you. We need to get to that Carson question. Carson, are you going to be single for the rest of your life?
What I love about this question is this feels like the beginning of a rom-com. Like I play the female that is like working really hard. She's like, I'm a career-oriented woman, and they're like, oh, you can be single for the rest of your life, and you're like, yeah, watch this movie. Anyway, in all seriousness, that is a completely good and valid question, because this is it's touching on what my parents expressed, which was concern about what the rest of my life would look like when I shared what I believe. So I believe that all Christians are called to either celibacy, so remaining single for the rest of your life, or marriage, and my definition of marriage would then be Christian marriage between a man and a woman. So yeah, I do believe that those are the two camps, those are the two options for me. As of this moment, and I do know couples where one or both members are LGBT, maybe like the man is gay and the woman is straight or something like that. That's called a mixed orientation marriage. I do know people who are in those. I personally have not felt called to that. I haven't felt like super confident or comfortable with that idea. So yeah, celibacy is where I'm feeling called right now. I would say in general, I'm not a big future thinker, so I will admit that I think I tend to reduce and minimize like the troubles that are going to come with that, the things that are going to be hard. I have a really great friend, Tim, who does a really good job of kind of like reminding me like, hey, maybe be thinking about like what the rest of your life is going to look like, following God this way, and like the challenges that are to come, the community and people that you're going to need. And that's been helpful. But yeah, and I recently went to a conference called Revoice. I don't know if anyone's ever heard that, but that's for people who are LGBT Christians who uphold the same beliefs I do, like the traditional beliefs. And it's been really great to meet other people who are in the same camp as me and just kind of know that I have those friendships. And I'm not the only one making that decision, because when I was having these conversations with my family, I felt like, it's pretty unanimous, like this is not right, and you're naive, and this isn't gonna work.
Thank you, Carson.
Yeah.
So this is for anyone. How can a Christian who disagrees with your viewpoint be a good friend to you? Can you stay in relationship with those with whom you disagree?
I think the big piece is, what are the conversations like, and what is the relationship like? I think one thing I definitely learned today, and I hope a lot of people have, is it's different when somebody's choosing the path and journey and being authentic to themselves, just as Carson just said, than someone putting on something on another person of you're wrong, you're not right. And so I think that that's a big piece of how relationships can continue on. It's stressful when people are being treated less than the 100%, as Elias said. I think that's then when relationships are evaluated for myself.
I think, hold on, I just repeat that question again.
Can you?
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
I need my reading glasses.
To,
Is it up there? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So me personally, I can, because I like to see past what we label ourselves as, gay, straight, bi, Christian, left, right, so on and so forth. If I've had a relationship with you, we've already created something, so I'm gonna respect that if you're gonna respect that. Now, if you decide that how I am living my life, that's uncomfortable for you, then that's unfortunately on you at that point, and you would have to make that decision. But currently, I have friends from all different walks of life, all different views, and we've just come to the fact that we all respect each other as humans, which we all should do anyways. But so that's what we just do, is have a very genuine sense of respect for each other. So yeah.
Okay. How do you see these conversations play out differently in Latino communities? Have you all noticed any difference in that? Is that something that you can
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I actually kind of transferred mid high school year, and I went to a school that was very, you could see where the Mexicans were, I'll just say that. So I instantly grouped to those people. And then the year after, when I came out to my high school community, I lost all those friends. In the Mexican culture, it's a very heavily masculine, but the man runs everything, the man provides. And so honestly, there isn't really any conversation in public about these kind of issues. It's mostly happened at the kitchen table, or among the women of the family, they'll gossip with each other, talk about, oh, did you know someone's son, da, 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 da. But no, it doesn't really happen. I think it's just because as a people, we're all kind of taught that being a certain way can be viewed as less than, so you don't want to talk about that if your whole community kind of thinks that way. Would you? I don't know.
Yeah. I would also say, in our experience, you're an individual, but you're also so much part of representing your family that in our experience and in the Latin community, whatever you are is such a reflection, right, of your parents, your sister, your grandma, your grandpa. And so, especially I think for a male, it's harder for a young man to come out, maybe even than a young woman, because of the kind of machismo attitude. And it's not everyone, and it's not to make a general statement, but in our experience, I think we, except for my dad and stepmother, we've I think been pretty blessed that our immediate family and some of the extended family, has been, family first no matter what. But to have a conversation like this, I don't know. I would love to see that happen.
Well, look at us starting a new thing here. This question is for David. What encouragement or advice can you give to young Christians who may be struggling with their gender identity? Do we have enough time for this?
Chapter more. What encouragement and advice? No advice. Encouragement. I mean, it's the same. I sound like I feel like I make it too simple. I guess for me, you have to have for me, you have to have a relationship with Jesus. So if they're in the faith and they're pursuing Christ, then just do that, because all of their questions will filter through that. So, what is my gender identity? Where is my gender identity? What can I do about my gender identity? How important is it to make decisions? The encouragement would be to practice your faith. At the same time, I would then be inclined to caution, find the right community and to do that in. Because obviously there may not always be an accessibility for a community for them to actively do that. And if there isn't, I mean, I want to say I had a list of like 20, which is a blessing. I think I had about 20 people that I went through the process with and used for, some of them were pastors, some of them were pastors not in my denomination, some were family members, some were friends, some were professors that I could go to for various things. So surround yourself with your own little board, if you will, or your people that you can go to. And start there. Did I answer it? Yeah.
Thank you. Next one, I'm a boomer. When I was a teenager, I heard the word queer. For a long time, I did not hear it in a positive way. Why is it now commonplace? The Q in LGBTQ.
I think just we've evolved with our language, to be honest. So hard. I don't know, I just think we just honestly evolved with our language. We know kind of going forward what is and what isn't acceptable, and I think queer, for a while we were taught that it means weird or out of place, to where the LGBT community has kind of embraced that, and it does, but we kind of are. So, I think we kind of use it as more of a term of empowerment, because I don't really see it used anymore as anything derogatory.
I think also because gender and sexuality has become a spectrum, so it speaks along the lines that language has changed. At some point you do run out of words, and if we keep adding letters, this is my opinion, but if we keep adding letters, we're never going to get to the end. And that's not a bad thing. We want to be inclusive, but there's only like so many letters. So I think whoever did this, I don't understand it either, so I was really excited to hear your answer to that. Because I was raised by boomers and I have no clue that it was okay to call people queer, and I still won't do it. So.
Yeah, and I've heard it being said that it's almost like a reclamation of the word, and that has happened in like the community will take the N-word and utilize within their own communities. And so it's like, it takes the power of negativity away from that word. It's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna call myself that, and you using it derogatorily, it doesn't work anymore, because that's what I'm calling myself. And like, to what you said, that like, queer kind of covers kind of the whole gamut. And some people are okay with that label and some are not, but along with all the other like same-sex attracted versus gay or whatever, so personal preference. Let's see. That's an interesting one at the top. Why is it important to come out? Why is it important to say I'm gay when we don't hear I'm heterosexual?
Good question. I'd say the big thing is there's an assumption in general, like the default is that a person is heterosexual. So the reason why we have to come out is more so because everyone's expectations for you, yeah, I would say everyone's expectations for you and the way that you relate with the world can feel kind of disingenuous unless you're kind of being open about like, well, here's all my experiences. Like I think for me, it coming out, it's just kind of shedding light on, you know, I'm attracted to people of the same sex. So what that means for me is that I'm not aligning with you guys when I hang out with, yeah, okay, so now my brain is thinking of like a lot of examples. When I was at a sleepover and I was 13 years old and all the boys were talking about girls they liked, and I was like, how come I've literally never thought that? I better choose one to like. I was like I need to say something because they're looking at me. But like that, you know, those are the moments. And then later on after college when I joined a church, and then all the guys I'm hanging out with are talking about who they're considering dating and, you know, how they're looking forward to marriage and all this stuff, and I'm like, well, my head isn't there either. And so I think it's the idea of like, until you take up space and say, here's my full experience, you can't actually expect anyone to be able to take true care of you. So by me saying like, I'm gay, I'm attracted to men rather than women, that means people can actually be a better friend to me and they can know me more fully than if I were to keep that to myself.
Transgender people come out 1,000 times, and so I think probably very much for the same reasons. I wanted to add, actually just talked with my wife about this the other day. I think because she and I differ on who I should and shouldn't tell, not in a bad way, but for me, pastorally, I usually will tell a pastor because I am a liability for pastors when I go to their church. I feel like I'm a liability, so that may or may not be true, but I really am, especially if I go to a church that I know is non-affirming on paper, or non-inclusive on paper. And so for me, it's important for me to tell them about, you know, that I'm not exactly how I appear, or there could be a difference. Mainly because I don't want them to lose their license if something happens and they find out. As well as, I think for any, I can't speak well for, but I mean, transgender isn't the only one, right? There's intersex, there's gender nonconforming, there's all kinds of, I think I would say we go along the same lines. There's this expectation that you appear one way, but you may or may not, how you're perceiving and living your life would be different. And so just really having to, because it is not what the expectation is, it's important to kind of, well, this is where I am, and so sharing that with other people. I mean, come on, we all want to be validated. So I think at the very core of this, just being able to say what you are and how you're looking through that portion of your life is important.
I think for me personally, it was for the sake of my mental health. Just because, you know, a lot of the times you realize you're gay, probably at, like, when you start going through puberty, well, I did at least. And I couldn't, after, when I did it when I was 18 again, I went through so much at that point. I was angry, and I was just mad all the time, and I never felt I could trust anybody. And when I came out, it felt like the biggest weight was lifted off my back, because I didn't have to lie anymore to everybody. Even though I'm sure it's quite obvious, I didn't have to actually say, no, I'm not gay, I had to make up a girlfriend every other week, you know. So doing all
talk about nature, nurture, choice, genetics. Do you think sexuality is a choice, or is it genetic and inherent to one's life?
I feel like this is like the $1 million question in this subject. Like it's got to come up, and I think it's good to ask. I would be as bold to say that I don't think anyone knows, like for a fact. Well, I'm going to specify what I really don't know, I guess, because I just realized that could be misconstrued. I don't believe it's a choice. Now, in terms of nature versus nurture, that's more what I mean. Is I don't really think anyone has like hard scientific evidence. I feel like there's a lot of studies that like conflict, but I don't really know what I'm talking about either. I'm just gay. Like I don't know.
You're just gay, you didn't choose it.
Yeah, I'm gay and uninformed. That's why, which is dangerous. But but I feel like between nature and nurture, I don't really know if I'm ever going to know that. Like I really don't know. I don't know what gene causes it. I really don't know with that. But that doesn't really bother me. Like I don't wake up and go like, dear God, why am I gay? I'm going to sit here until you tell me, and I'm not going to live my life. I don't really know. But I will boldly say that I know it's not a choice, and I'm sure you might have heard this argument 1,000 times, but there's no way that 13-year-old me ever would have chosen that. 13-year-old me wanted to fit in so bad. I still want to fit in all the time. It's not fun. It's not fun to feel different a lot of the time. And it's not fun to have constant coming out conversations and to meet a new friend and be like, wow, this is going great. And to come out to them, like that's not fun. And so, no, definitely not a choice, because there's no way that I ever would have made the choice to feel different, to feel like an outsider at times. Not that I'm saying being gay is like this horrible thing. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that there's no way that my 13-year-old self ever would have chosen it.
I think I would add that it is the question, and the answer will never solve or give any reason to not have an LGBT person have access to the gospel.
Definitely believe it's not a choice. Just because, and me and my mom joke that when I was going through the phase of trying to date a girl, I noticed I was always attracted to like more masculine. I guess is the way to put it. I don't know. One of the girls I did ended up being like a very butch lesbian, so there's that. But no, I think kind of piggybacking off what Carson said, especially growing up Hispanic, I would never choose myself to be discriminated for being gay, and then being Hispanic, and then being discriminated in my Hispanic community.
Right.
I mean, I don't love hate that much, so yeah.
Awesome.
I would just like to say, also as a parent, I don't believe it's a choice. And I think that for myself, when I was honest, it was something very young in age that I knew. There was something. Maybe I wasn't 100% sure, but there was something. And I've seen it even in other young individuals. I do think that there's a lot of other choices we make, but we focus on this as the choice. I think, we choose our faith, and we choose our walk, and we choose all of our other stances, but this is the question that seems to be the one that people ask the most.
All right, so it's 9 o'clock on the dot. Pretty good. I hate to cut off. I'm sorry we didn't get to all. We almost got to all the questions. So we're going to wrap things up here. Before we dismiss you, I just wanted to make sure that you all noticed the resource table out there. And if you haven't had a chance to look at the graffiti walls that are out there, that's kind of a cool thing that LOVEboldly does. We go to the Cincinnati Gay Pride Parade and put these banners out and allow people to write answers to various questions. This is 2 of, I think, 6 that we have, and they're just very enlightening and humbling. And so if you have a moment, read through some of those. The resource table's located right next to them. There's a lot of next steps that you can take. We don't want you to leave this and just be like, okay, that's great, we had a nice little conversation and everything's over. We want you to continue this with the people that are in your life, and I know you wanting answers or just wanting to talk through this. And so one of our newest resources is called Words Can Crush, and you'll find that out there. And it's just kind of like I don't know if you want to call it a glossary of words that may be offensive or triggering, or you can say this and not that. And I think a lot of times there is so much discouragement from entering into these conversations because you're afraid that you're going to offend someone. And so this resource, we hope, gives you some confidence in entering these conversations without feeling that maybe you're going to be less offensive as you approach the conversation. Also, we have an upcoming Lunch and Learn in Columbus. There are flyers for those out on the table out there. That's a 1.5 hour training course. This one's specifically geared towards ministry leaders and kind of, how can we enter this conversation? How can we make our places of worship a safe space for LGBTQ people? And that is coming up towards the end of this month, August 27th in Columbus. Then in October, 1st and 2nd, we have our Devoted training, and so that's like a larger day-and-a-half seminar that really kind of digs into all aspects of that, and just we want people to leave with some tools and resources to be better, safer, loving communities. And I'm going to give you a promo code for that if that's something that you're interested in. We're going to give $20 off registration to anybody who's in attendance here today, and that'll be good through August 15th, and it's Restore, so that's easy to remember. That's the name of this dialogue event that we have here. So you can go to our website to check out information on registering for that, and there's a flyer out there that gives you information on the people that will be speaking and kind of the things that will be covered in that. Let's see, lots of other information out there about what we do. Oh, also, there's a really cool organization that I've become involved with in the last few months, and it's called Living Room Conversations. And it's basically this kind of thing that we're doing here. And this organization has almost 100 different conversation guides that you can download from their website over a whole slew of topics, from everything from empathy to gun control to immigration to abortion. And the purpose of this organization is to kind of do what we're doing today, and bringing along people that don't necessarily agree on something ideologically or theologically, and finding commonality in there, and even finding ways to move forward in kind of like repairing this torn fabric of our nation that I think that we've all experienced within the walls of the church and outside the walls of the church. So we have a few of those conversation guides out there. If you want to grab one of those, and you can gather some people in your own living room, and the guide just walks you right through questions and kind of like ground rules, very similar to what we were doing here. And it's just a really good way to just kind of foster that openness, and a lot of the things that you guys are talking about out there in your conversations can be, you will find those in these living room conversations. And there's opportunities to sign up for those online too, so you can talk with people all over the country. It's really cool. It's a really neat experience. So we have a couple guides out there. One is on empathy, and one was developed specifically for the UMC rift that's over the decision with the Methodist Church, and whether they were going to go forward with more affirming or not so affirming bylaws. And so those two are out there, really good resources. And now I'm going to turn it over to Heidi to close out. Don't forget the service.
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is just give a round of applause for all of our panelists. Thank you all so much for the transparency and vulnerability you all just put on full display tonight, and for the ways that you guys are entering these conversations and helping us to enter them better. I also want to just point out one of our local partners is here from a Safe and Supported Faith and Families program. We have Melissa Meyer and Andy Beagle here with us. We guys just waited quick. And there is some information out there. If you know a family that is going through the coming out process with their child and struggling through that. We've partnered with them to offer the Faith and Families program. There's information on the table back there, and I know either of them would be glad to answer any of your questions. And it's just a great supportive environment, non-judgmental environment for people of faith to navigate those conversations in a private environment. You've got some surveys that have been passed out to you. If you would just take a minute and fill those out before you leave, we want to know what you liked about this event, how we can make it even more helpful in the future. And I think there's a basket, or we may have some volunteers in the back as you walk out that will collect those from you all. And finally, I just want to close us, just take a little moment. I know these conversations can sometimes be triggering. Perhaps if you are a person who is part of the LGBTQ community or knows somebody and loves somebody who is, sometimes these conversations can be hard. And so I'm just really grateful for your presence here tonight, for your participation. I don't think we've ever had that many questions submitted in a night. So thank you guys so much. And I want you to know that if you need support or someone to talk to, I know myself or Heather or Pastor Jonathan would be happy to talk with you, and we'll be hanging out around here, and we'll be glad to plug you into whatever resources that you might need. And so I'd like to just close us with a prayer from St. Francis, which is one of my favorite prayers and one that we pray a lot around our Love Boldly gatherings. So if you would, bow your head with me. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Amen. Thank you. Go in peace.